I woke up this morning to the familiar hum of voices in the living room. My heart sank before my feet even touched the floor. I could already hear my mother's quick speech, tight with tension, as she asked my father if he'd made any progress on some little family errand I'd apparently failed to handle months ago. It's funny how the memory warps things when people are determined to paint you as a disappointment. I hadn't failed anything. I'd simply dared to question them about a decision I believed was unfair. But if you asked my family, they'd tell you it was just another example of me being unreliable. I stretched out on my bed, inhaling deeply. The room was too warm, or maybe my anxiety was making me sweat. My mother's voice escalated a notch, and I knew the conversation in the living room had turned to me. Every day it was the same routine. They'd talk as if I couldn't hear them through the thin walls, saying I was a lost cause, a disgrace. They claimed I couldn't follow through with what was expected of me. They'd complain that I was never living up to the family standards. In those moments, I always felt a surge of anger begin in my chest. It's not that I want to eavesdrop. But when the words are about you, so vicious and so certain, it's impossible not to freeze and listen. My mother declared, "I just hope she doesn't do anything to embarrass us today." My father gave a small grunt of agreement. Embarrass them? Oh yes, as if the worst I could do was make them look bad to the neighbors or the folks at the local grocery store. The thought made my cheeks burn. They never cared about what I wanted or how I might be feeling. All that concerned them was how I reflected on their precious family name. I forced myself to push away the agitation coiling inside me. If I started my day angry, they'd say, "Look at her sour face. She's always got an attitude." And if I hid in my room all day, they'd say, "She's so lazy and useless." My choices, apparently, were to be a steaming kettle of rage or a silent rock in the corner. Well, not today. I decided I wouldn't let them label me so easily. I'd keep calm, no matter how many little barbs they threw at me. When I finally shuffled out of my room, the tension in the living room sank into my skin like a cold draft. My mother, Cecilia, flicked a glance at me. Her eyes lingered on my wrinkled t-shirt. She seemed poised to criticize something, my hair, my clothes, or my posture. Instead, she pressed her lips together and straightened a decorative pillow on the couch, as though she couldn't bring herself to expend words on me yet. My father, Leonard, barely lifted his gaze from the morning newspaper. He offered a curt nod that felt more like a warning than a greeting. "Good morning," I said, clearing my throat. They both murmured some form of acknowledgement. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, underlining the uncomfortable pause. I offered nothing more, mostly because I knew they expected me to break that silence with a stuttered explanation of my plans for the day. But that's not how I wanted to play it. My father finally crumpled the top edge of his newspaper and spoke, "Don't stay out too late." The comment, strangely random, nonetheless stoked a fresh annoyance in me. I hadn't planned on going anywhere yet. And even if I had, was that all he cared about, my coming and going? Not whether I'd eaten, not whether I had something important to accomplish, just don't stay out too late, so I wouldn't cause them any inconvenience. I couldn't help rolling my eyes. "I have a job interview today, actually," I offered, trying to maintain a polite tone. It was true, though I'd only scheduled it the evening before, on a whim, as a last chance to snag a position that might help me move out of this suffocating household someday soon. So yes, I will be out part of the day, but I'll let you know if anything changes. My mother sniffed. A job interview? She sounded so skeptical, I wondered if it was physically painful for her to consider that I was trying to improve my life. "Where's this place located?" she asked, as if she suspected the interview was a cover story for something nefarious or shady. I shrugged, trying to project calm. "It's not far from here, a small startup just a few blocks away. They're looking for a project manager." Of course, my parents had never fully understood or valued my organizational skills. But I had them. If they wanted to keep labeling me a disgrace, well, let them. Maybe I didn't have a fancy track record, but I knew I could handle tasks, solve problems, and make things happen once I put my mind to it. My father turned a page of his newspaper, clearing his throat. "That's nice. Good luck," he said in a tone that implied the opposite. Then he looked pointedly at my shirt and added, "If you're serious, I hope you plan to wear something more appropriate. I felt a flare of annoyance. With deliberate calm, I replied, yes, of course. This is just what I slept in. I have a nice outfit laid out in my room. It stung, the way they both looked at me like I was clueless, but I bit my tongue. I'd long learned that defending myself too vigorously only escalated the conflict. The best strategy was to remain composed, like a fortress that refused to let their barbs penetrate. I retreated to my room, shoulders tight, and gently closed the door behind me. The slight click of the latch felt like a protective shield against their disapproval. I exhaled, trying to coax myself back to calm. Then I changed into the outfit I'd planned. A crisp blouse, a neat skirt that wasn't overly formal but still conveyed professionalism, and a pair of sensible yet stylish shoes. Checking my reflection in the mirror, I scrutinized my hair. The usual waves were a bit frizzy, so I brushed them into a controlled ponytail. A wave of determination rushed over me. This was my day, wasn't it? An entire day was about to unfold, and I could shape it however I wanted. I decided right then that I wouldn't let my parents' attitude hold me back. For too long, I had shrunk under their relentless criticism. Maybe today I'd finally break through. I was determined to arrive at the interview early, so I grabbed my shoulder bag and slipped out without another word. No cheerful goodbye from them, of course. I felt their silent disapproval hanging in the air. But this was about me taking a step forward, away from all the negativity. Outside, the morning sun was gentle and pleasant, a stark contrast to the chill inside my house. I savored a deep breath. My steps felt lighter, each one fueled by hope and annoyance in equal measure. It was a strange combination, but it propelled me forward. The interview location was about a 15-minute walk. As I strolled, I mentally rehearsed my responses to typical interview questions. The role was as a junior project manager at a small events company. True, I hadn't exactly soared through college with top honors. I'd been derailed by a family crisis or two, each time forced to put my own ambitions on hold so I could be more available for my parents. They never seemed to remember that I was the one who had paid certain bills when the finances got tight. They never remembered that I comforted them when extended family drama landed on our doorstep. No, all they wanted to remember were my missteps, my break from a more conventional path, my so-called lack of reliability. But I refused to dwell on that. This day was too important. The adrenaline of possibility hummed within me as I approached the little building that housed the events company. By the time I reached the lobby, my nerves were rattling, but I forced a confident smile for the receptionist, who pointed me upstairs. The CEO, whose name was Gloria, greeted me in a small conference room. She was warm but direct, and as soon as the conversation began, I felt a spark of excitement. She asked me about times I'd organized people, overcame logistical challenges, or managed conflicting personalities. It dawned on me, mid-sentence, that I actually had a wealth of experience, far more than my family gave me credit for. Even though my experiences were informal, such as mediating my siblings' arguments or juggling family responsibilities when no one else would step up, these were transferable skills. Gloria must have seen something in me. She leaned forward, listening intently, eyes keen. She asked follow-up questions that showed she appreciated resourcefulness and emotional intelligence. For the first time in a while, I felt validated. Someone was actually seeing me, hearing me, understanding that being the family disappointment didn't define my worth. The interview lasted an hour. It went far better than I could have hoped. By the end, Gloria shook my hand and said, "I'll be honest, I like you. We're a small outfit here, and we need someone who's agile, who can think on their feet. You have exactly the type of experience we can use. I'd like to bring you on board. Can you start next Monday?" My heart soared. I stammered a bit before I managed a solid, absolutely yes. "Thank you so much for this opportunity." She smiled, slipping me a crisp business card. "I think you'll do great. We can finalize the paperwork in the next couple of days. I'll be in touch." I left the building with a dizzy feeling of triumph. My mind was swimming with the knowledge that I had a job. Not just any job, but one where I might actually thrive. A job that might let me move out of my parents' home soon. A wave of relief nearly brought me to tears right there on the sidewalk. Just a few hours earlier, I'd been bracing myself against an onslaught of their usual criticism. Now, I had hope. Yet I also felt dread creeping in. How would my parents react? Would they sneer and call it just another worthless scheme? Or would they pretend to be happy and then sabotage me somehow? I knew I should keep my guard up. In their eyes, nothing I did was ever good enough. But I also felt a certain defiance bubbling beneath my joy. Let them look down on me. They could no longer control how I felt about myself. I had proven that I was more than just a punching bag for their disappointment. My next stop was a small bookstore down the street, where I'd once spent countless hours escaping reality by reading mysteries and adventure novels. Today, I only wanted to buy a small notebook, a symbol for new beginnings, and maybe indulge in a quick beverage from the attached cafe. I stepped inside, inhaling the familiar scent of paper and brewed coffee. The quiet lull of the bookstore felt like a sanctuary. The bespectacled cashier greeted me with a gentle smile as I approached with my chosen notebook and a fresh pen. "Finding everything okay?" she asked. I nodded, returning the smile. "Yes, thank you." She rang me up, and in a spontaneous surge of confidence, I said, "I just got offered a new job, so I'm celebrating with a brand new notebook." Her face lit up. "Congratulations. That's wonderful." The sincerity of her reaction warmed me. It was a small exchange, but it reminded me that not everyone in the world looked at me and saw a disappointment. Some people could genuinely be happy for a stranger's good fortune. If only my own parents had that capacity. I settled into a seat near the cafe window with my drink. I flipped open my new notebook, and in big letters, I scrawled, "Today is the day my life changes." The words looked a little dramatic, but in that moment, they felt absolutely true. With a spark of excitement, I started jotting down everything that needed to happen before Monday, gather my references, finalize some personal details, figure out my budget to see how soon I could get a place of my own. Immersed in thought, I lost track of time until my phone buzzed in my bag, a text from my younger sister, Claudette. We'd never been all that close, but she was the only sibling who didn't outright despise me. She asked if I was busy because she needed help with something urgent. My stomach nodded. Urgent requests from my family typically meant they needed me to rush in and fix something. But I couldn't ignore her. She was still my sister. I finished my drink, stuffed the notebook in my bag, and replied that I could be there soon. Claudette was only a mile away, so I walked, letting the brisk air clear my mind. By the time I arrived, I found her pacing outside an old building near the downtown area, tears in her eyes. She looked up, startled by my approach, and then rushed forward, hugging me with trembling arms. I hadn't expected that level of desperation. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She glanced around nervously, as if she didn't want onlookers to overhear. After a moment, she sighed and told me that she'd just discovered a serious financial discrepancy at her workplace. She was the bookkeeper at a small family-owned shop, and apparently, a couple of months' worth of accounts weren't matching up. Some money had vanished. "I don't know what to do," she murmured, tears slipping down her cheeks. "The boss is furious, and I'm scared they'll think I did something wrong." I was double-checking everything this morning when I realized the extent of it. "I've tried talking to them, but they're pointing the finger at me." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's go somewhere quiet," I said. "We can figure this out." She nodded, letting me guide her around the corner to a small diner that wasn't too crowded. We settled into a booth by the window, and the waitress brought us water. Claudette was breathing hard. In hushed tones, she explained that her boss, Mr. Harris, believed the missing money was because of sloppy bookkeeping or, worse, theft. She insisted she wasn't stealing anything, but no one was giving her the benefit of the doubt. I felt a flicker of sympathy. Though she and I had never been close, I knew she wasn't dishonest. Still, a shadow of resentment flitted through me. Where was the rest of our family now? Probably at home, talking about how incompetent or foolish she was. That's how they always were. I was the scapegoat, but they didn't hesitate to demean Claudette as well whenever it suited them. I carefully asked for details, how the accounts were balanced, the timeline, and what kind of software they used. While I wasn't an accountant, I was good at problem-solving and detail-oriented tasks. Even as I questioned her, I realized that ironically, the same traits that led my parents to criticize me for being difficult might be the key to helping my sister. She showed me some receipts and notes from her bag, numbers scribbled hastily, bright highlighter circles. We pored over them, ordering a light lunch so we wouldn't get kicked out for loitering. Slowly but surely, I saw a pattern emerging in the numbers. There was an inconsistency that repeated every few days, and it didn't seem random. "Look here," I whispered. "The amounts that are missing always appear right before Mr. Harris makes large inventory purchases, but they never show up on the actual inventory records. Are you sure no one else has access to these books?" She looked at me with wide eyes. "Well, Mr. Harris has the master password. It's possible that he—" "No, that can't be right," she stuttered. I knew what she was thinking. Could her own boss be cooking the books and blaming her? The more we examined it, the clearer it became that Claudette was a victim. I gave her shoulder a comforting squeeze. "I don't want to jump to accusations," I said. "But you need to gather all these records. Make copies. Show the pattern to someone higher up, maybe an external advisor. If your boss is doing something shady, you need proof." Claudette nodded, relief flickering in her gaze. "Thank you so much," she whispered, tears still glistening. I felt her gratitude like a hot wave, and it was bittersweet. All my life, my family had insisted I was the incompetent one. Yet here I was, likely saving Claudette from a wrongful accusation, and I was more than willing to help. She insisted on giving me a quick hug and then dashed back to the shop, saying she felt braver now, like she had a plan. I watched her go, noticing that her posture was already straighter than it had been when I first found her. A surge of pride swelled in me. It was nice to help someone, especially in a situation where my methodical thinking could make a real difference. I glanced at the time. It wasn't even noon yet, and already the day felt like a whirlwind. I decided to go for a brief walk to clear my head before returning home. The day was warm but with a gentle breeze, the streets not too crowded. Perfect for reflection. As I strolled, my mind flitted between excitement about my new job, lingering annoyance at my parents, and concern about Claudette's predicament. Maybe I should have been more distant, let her figure it out alone. But I couldn't do that. Beneath all the hurt, I still loved my sister. Eventually, I made my way back home. The living room was quiet when I entered. My mother looked up from a paperback novel, eyebrows arched. "Where have you been?" she asked, in that accusatory tone. She didn't really want the details. She wanted to imply that I was doing something shady. I gave a casual shrug, refusing to be baited. I had my interview, which went well, and then I helped Claudette with a work issue. She tilted her head. "Claudette called you? Really?" My mother sounded both suspicious and faintly annoyed, as if it irritated her that Claudette would rely on me for help. She tossed the paperback on the coffee table. "Did you manage to avoid causing any scenes?" That question rankled, but I forced a small, polite smile. Everything was fine. I hesitated, then decided to drop my big news. "By the way, I got the job. I start on Monday." My mother pursed her lips. It was clear she was searching for a negative angle. After a few beats, she said, "I suppose you'll need to buy some new clothes. That's if you keep this job for more than a week." Her words were like a slap in the face. I felt anger boil, but I fought to keep it under control. "It's a permanent position," I said calmly. "They want me long-term. They trust my skill set." Then I slipped off my shoes and turned to go to my room, but her voice followed me. "Don't expect us to pick up the slack if you realize you can't handle it," she snapped. "You have a habit of bailing on commitments." I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "Actually," I said in a measured tone, "it's you who taught me perseverance. I had to put up with a lot of criticism here, so I learned to stand on my own 2 feet. A twinge of guilt pricked at me. I rarely spoke back so directly. But maybe it was time. I continued, "Don't worry. I won't ask for anything from you." Then I went to my room, shut the door, and collapsed onto my bed, my heart hammering. My mother's words stung, but I realized I wasn't as devastated by them as I once would have been. Because I knew they were wrong. For the first time in a while, I felt a shield of certainty about my own capabilities. I took a moment to breathe, thinking about the next few hours. It was still early afternoon, which left plenty of time for yet more drama in a house like mine. My father would be home soon from running whatever errand he'd been on, and I knew I'd have to face his cold disapproval as well. Sometimes I'd fantasize about packing my things immediately and staying with a friend. But I had no illusions. Finances were tight, and while I had a job offer, I hadn't actually started yet. I needed to be strategic. Just as I was drifting into a half-doze, footsteps sounded in the hallway. My father's deep voice resonated through the walls, presumably updating my mother on something. There was a rustling of paper, and then I heard the front door open again. I suspected they were going out, perhaps for groceries or a meet-up with family friends. My parents never gave me details, probably because they didn't think I was worth telling. Deciding I needed air, I slipped outside, too. I walked around the side of the house into our modest backyard, letting the sun warm my face. Our yard was unkempt, with a few stubborn weeds poking through the grass. My parents didn't bother much with the landscaping. Off in the distance, I could see a father pushing a stroller, a mother trailing behind with a toddler in tow. The scene caused a pang of longing in me for warmth, acceptance, a sense of togetherness that I rarely felt under my own roof. I sat on the old wooden bench near the fence, rummaging through my bag for my new notebook. Opening it, I reread the phrase I'd written earlier. Today is the day my life changes. So far, it had proven true. I felt unstoppable, at least in moments when I allowed myself the luxury of optimism. But the jangle of keys at the front of the house indicated my parents were leaving again, so I seized the opportunity. I headed back inside, rummaged around in the kitchen for a snack, and decided to treat myself to some creativity. For me, that meant writing down a few sketches of event ideas, tasks, or potential processes I could propose when I started my new job. For the next hour, I lost myself in possibility. I filled page after page in the notebook, imagining a future where I was the one coordinating large events, ensuring everything ran smoothly, and receiving genuine gratitude for my work. No longer would I be the scapegoat at home. This day was the pivot point. And then a knock came at the door. I frowned, checking the time. Mid-afternoon. Who'd be knocking when my parents weren't around? I placed my notebook aside and went to answer it. To my surprise, my cousin Candace was standing there. She was the same age as me, and we'd grown up close until she'd decided I was too rebellious, which her mother had hammered into her. Lately, she only visited to relay my aunt's criticisms or spread gossip. I opened the door a crack. Yes! I tried to sound polite, though I had a sinking feeling this wouldn't be pleasant. Hey! She cleared her throat. Can I come in? I stepped aside, letting her in. Her gaze darted around like she expected to see my parents at any moment. Finally, she followed me to the living room. She perched stiffly on the edge of the couch, folding her hands in her lap. I guess you heard, she said, an accusatory edge in her tone. I raised an eyebrow. Heard what? That the entire extended family is upset with you again, she snapped. Apparently, you missed Uncle Ralph's get-together last night. Everyone expected you to show up. I stared at her, baffled. What? I didn't even know there was a get-together. She rolled her eyes. Sure you didn't. Look, my mom told me to come over and see what your excuse was this time. She said you disrespected Uncle Ralph by not showing up. My temper flared. Candace, I said, struggling for composure I genuinely did not know. No one told me. If they told my parents, well, they certainly didn't pass the message along. She shrugged, unconvinced. I'm just telling you what everyone's been saying. They think you're a disgrace, that you don't value the family. They say you were probably sulking or off doing your own thing. I pressed my lips together. Candace, do you realize how unfair that is? They never communicate with me, and then they blame me for not being where they want me to be. I can't be a mind reader. She shrugged again, her expression stony. Don't shoot the messenger. A wave of frustration rolled through me. All right, well, messenger or not, you're here. Let me set the record straight. I wasn't invited, so I couldn't have gone. If they want me to be part of the family, maybe they can treat me like I matter. For a brief moment, Candace's facade cracked. I saw a flicker of sympathy in her eyes, but she quickly buried it. They think you have no sense of loyalty, she said, almost mechanically. I realized she was just parroting what she'd been told. But anyway, I have to go. Just, maybe call Uncle Ralph and apologize. That's all I came to say. I shook my head in disbelief as she headed back to the door. Thanks for dropping by, I said, my voice dripping with irony. She paused, like she wanted to say something else, but she just sighed and left. I found myself alone, trembling with anger. The nerve of them, calling me a disgrace for missing an event they never even told me about. My mother's earlier words about me being an embarrassment echoed in my ears. It was an old, familiar pain, but it still stung. I paced the living room, trying to gather my thoughts. I knew that one call to Uncle Ralph might smooth things over, at least on the surface. But I was so tired of constantly having to appease people who never showed me the slightest kindness. Still, I forced myself to call him, if only to avoid more drama. Hello, came his gravelly voice after the third ring. Hi, Uncle Ralph, it's me, I said, trying to keep my tone respectful. I just heard from Candace that you had a get-together last night. I wanted you to know I wasn't invited or aware. I wasn't ignoring you. He gave a non-committal grunt. Well, I told your mother. She should have told you. But either way, the family was disappointed. I pinched the bridge of my nose. I'm sorry about that. I do appreciate you wanting me there. I honestly didn't know. All right then. Next time, try to check in with your parents ahead of time, he advised, as if it was my responsibility to confirm every rumored gathering. But I guess all's forgiven. Now I have to go. He ended the call before I could respond. My chest tightened with a mixture of anger and sadness. I tried to calm myself. The day wasn't over yet, and if the pattern held, more negativity might be coming my way. But I refused to let it overshadow my personal triumphs. I ended up tidying the house a bit, mostly to channel my restless energy. I washed dishes, wiped counters, fluffing pillows, things that typically no one noticed unless they needed an excuse to blame me for not doing them. After about an hour, I heard the front door open again. My parents had returned. My father strode in, carrying a small shopping bag, and my mother followed behind him, whispering something. They both paused in the kitchen archway when they saw me cleaning up. My father cleared his throat. So, we ran into your aunt just now, he said. She mentioned something about Uncle Ralph being upset that you weren't there last night. Care to explain? I set down the rag and faced them. It was never communicated to me, I said calmly. I found out only today. I called him to apologize. He nodded, lips thinning, as if reluctant to drop the matter. My mother walked over and opened the fridge, rummaging around for something. Finally, my father added, well, I'm sure next time, you'll be better informed. He didn't bother admitting that it was their fault, having not passed the invitation along. Instead, he walked off, conversation apparently done. It was incredible, their ability to overlook their own mistakes and point the finger at me. Still, I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was no longer swirling in guilt or shame. I had a job, I had my own path forming. Maybe that was enough for today. Time crept on. Late afternoon light streamed through the windows. My mother busied herself cooking an early dinner. The smell of grilled onions and seasoned chicken drifted through the house. My father watched the news on TV. I debated shutting myself in my room to avoid them, but a part of me refused. I wasn't going to hide. I was done hiding. When the food was ready, my mother half-heartedly asked if I wanted a plate. It wasn't a warm invitation, but it was more than I usually got. I said yes, sat down at the dining table, and began to eat. My father joined us, though we barely talked. The only conversation was his occasional grunt at the television. My mother's eyes flicked toward me now and then, as though searching for a reason to scold me. But I kept my eyes on my plate, focusing on each bite, letting the simple action of eating ground me. After a few moments, she set down her fork and said, so, this job, is it full-time? Are there benefits? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I said, swallowing. It's full-time. They'll give me health insurance after a probationary period. My father snorted. Huh, and you're sure you can handle 40 hours a week? I took another bite, mustering patience. Yes, I can handle it. They're excited to have me, and I'm looking forward to proving myself. Neither parent replied right away. Then my mother said, well, don't let it interfere with family obligations. I bit back a retort. What obligations? The ones you never tell me about? The ones you hold me accountable for but don't share with me? Instead, I just said, I'll do my best and return to my meal. We finished the meal in tense silence. It was a microcosm of my life here, minimal conversation, overshadowed by dissatisfaction. But I no longer felt worthless. Today had changed that. They might sneer and complain, but I had secured a future. That knowledge was like a flame inside me, something they couldn't extinguish with a few dismissive remarks. After dinner, I washed my plate, then decided to return to my room. I needed the quiet. The day wasn't over, but it was winding down, and I wanted to reflect. I sank onto my bed, rummaging for my notebook again, ready to outline more ideas for my upcoming job. Just as I clicked my pen, there was a knock. I sighed. Come in, I said, expecting my mother or father with more demands. But it was Claudette. She peeked around the door, and I motioned for her to enter. My sister rarely visited, but her face lit with relief when she saw my open, if tired, expression. Hey, she said softly. Mind if I sit? I nodded, gesturing to the edge of the bed. She perched there, fiddling with her sleeves. I wanted to say thank you for today, she began, voice wavering. I went back to work and I laid out all the evidence. My boss kept trying to intimidate me, but once I showed him the pattern, he kind of froze. He insisted it was all a mistake and said he'd investigate. But I could tell he was nervous. She swallowed hard. Anyway, I really appreciate your help. A warmth surged inside me. I'm glad it helped, I said softly. She mustered a small smile. That's not all. I mentioned what you did to Mom, and she dismissed it, of course. But I just wanted you to know. I see you. I know you're not incompetent or a disgrace. You were probably the only one who bothered to help me. And I'm sorry if I ever contributed to the negativity. I felt my throat close up with emotion. This was probably the kindest thing Claudette had ever said to me. It means a lot to hear you say that, I said. I know how hard it is in this family when you don't fit their mold. She nodded fervently, tears gathering in her eyes. I feel it too. I guess I just had an easier time staying out of the line of fire, so I kept my head down. I didn't realize how bad it was for you. I shook my head. It's okay. I know how they are. But I'm tired of letting them shape how I see myself. We sat there in mutual understanding, the silence between us no longer awkward, but comforting. Eventually, I asked, what are you going to do if your boss tries to frame you, or if he continues to accuse you? She drew a shaky breath. I won't let him. I'm going to gather as much evidence as possible. If I have to, I'll get a lawyer. I'm not letting this ruin me. I nodded, proud of her new resolve. Good. Keep me updated, okay? If you need more help, let me know. She left a few minutes later, and though we didn't hug, the air felt lighter. For the first time in ages, I felt a glimmer of sibling connection. Maybe it wouldn't erase years of friction or overshadow our parents' negativity, but it was a start. I couldn't help but think that this day was turning into a turning point, pushing me further away from the powerless role my parents had forced on me and closer to someone capable, supportive, and strong. I realized I was actually excited for them to see me thrive, if only because their shock would be so satisfying. Hours drifted by. The sun set, painting the sky with fiery streaks of pink and gold. I stayed in my room, occasionally hearing voices from the living room. I heard my father on the phone, probably more family gossip about me. But it didn't rattle me the way it used to. Instead, a small spark of defiance glowed in my chest, reminding me that I didn't need their approval. At around 9, I heard my name being called. Reluctantly, I headed out to the living room, bracing for another scolding. But to my surprise, my mother looked uncomfortable, almost uncertain, as if she wasn't sure how to approach me. My father glanced at me briefly, then directed his gaze to the TV again. My mother cleared her throat. "So," she said, her voice low, "Claudette told me that you helped her with a serious situation at work." That's good of you." I blinked. Was this praise? From my mother? She looked everywhere, but at me, her fingers fidgeting with a fold in her blouse. I decided not to sabotage the moment. "Yes," I said evenly. She was in trouble, so I did what I could. "She's my sister." My mother nodded, biting her lip. Her words came out haltingly. "I guess that shows some responsibility." She paused, and I knew that might be as close as she would come to complimenting me. Then her tone shifted to something sharper. "But don't think that cancels out all the chaos you've caused in the past. We still remember everything." I felt a surge of frustration, but I forced myself to stay collected. "I'm not looking for your forgiveness or anything. I'm just living my life. I'm doing what I believe is right. If you want to see it as redemption for past mistakes, fine. But I'm not doing it for you." My mother bristled, looking taken aback. My father finally chimed in, "There's no need to get high and mighty. Your mother's just saying she's glad you helped Claudette. That's all." I decided to interpret their words as kindly as possible, though they delivered them in that aggravating, half-critical tone. "Well, I'm glad she's okay," I answered simply. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have some preparation to do for my new job." With that, I turned and returned to my room, ignoring the faint tension behind me. I closed the door, leaning against it, exhaling. My heart pounded, but I felt strangely triumphant. They'd given me a backhanded sort of acknowledgement. It wasn't a full acceptance or an apology for how they'd treated me, but it was the closest they'd come in years to admitting I wasn't an absolute failure. And I didn't need them to say more than that. It already felt like I was moving into a new chapter. Still, I wondered if I'd ever be able to transform their view of me entirely. They'd called me a disgrace so many times. Was it too late to change that narrative? Part of me wanted to prove them wrong, to make them so proud they'd have to brag about me. But another part felt like their approval no longer mattered. I wanted peace for myself, not to please them. I took my mind off it by writing down more ideas for my first week at the company. My imagination soared as I visualized the tasks I might be assigned, the projects I could improve, how I'd collaborate with colleagues. I wrote furiously, losing track of time. And then, with a satisfied stretch, I noticed it was nearing midnight. One day. That's all it had been. In one day, I'd landed a new job, helped my sister, stood up to my parents, and found a fragile sense of self-worth growing within me. My chest felt full, almost too full, like I couldn't contain everything I was experiencing. The old me would have collapsed in tears by now, or run off to a friend's house to vent. But the new me was still standing. And I dared to believe that tomorrow would be better. When I finally turned off the lights and crawled into bed, my mind kept racing. I remembered the new manager, Gloria, telling me how excited she was to have me. I recalled the cashier at the bookstore congratulating me with genuine warmth. I revisited the relief on Claudette's face when she realized I'd helped her see the truth behind her missing funds. These were moments of validation that my parents had never really given me. But they were real, and they mattered to me more than anything else. Lying there in the darkness, I found myself reflecting on the absurd irony of my life. They told me I was a disgrace to the family. Now they brag about me to everyone. I wondered, could that actually be on the horizon? Yes, I thought. Perhaps I wasn't hearing them brag yet, but I sensed the shift. The day was coming when they would realize I wasn't the disgrace they'd always painted me to be. And when that day finally arrived, I wouldn't let resentment swallow me up. I wouldn't become arrogant or cruel. I'd simply keep doing what I was doing, living my life, working hard, caring for people who deserved my care, and not letting anyone else's negativity define my worth. I drifted into a light sleep, only to be startled awake an hour or so later by the muffled sound of voices. My parents. They were talking in the next room, voices audible through our paper-thin walls. With a weary sigh, I strained to listen. At first, I thought it was just their usual late-night chatter. But then I heard my name. I froze, focusing on the words. Maybe she's finally getting her act together, my father said, in a gruff tone that suggested half-reluctant acceptance. My mother's response was quieter, but I caught most of it. She helped Claudette, and she got a job. Maybe she won't embarrass us so much. A pause. But I still don't trust. I couldn't make out the rest. My heart was pounding as if I'd run a marathon. Part of me wanted to laugh in disbelief. That was their version of a compliment? That maybe I wouldn't embarrass them? Yet, in a twisted way, it almost made me happy. Because despite their pride and stubbornness, I could tell they were beginning to realize I had substance. It was the slightest shift, but it was real. I closed my eyes, letting a wave of exhaustion carry me back to sleep. In the morning, I awoke with a sense of renewal. I had spent so long yearning for my parents' acceptance, but now that I'd had a taste of standing on my own feet, I realized I didn't need them to define me anymore. Today I had set events in motion that would lead to my real future, a future free from their constant negativity. When I went into the kitchen, my mother was making coffee. She gave me a tight-lipped nod. "Coffee?" she asked, her tone less harsh than usual. I accepted a mug, and we stood in silence for a moment. "Finally," she said, "I guess. Congratulations on the job." She didn't meet my eyes, but it was something. "Thank you," I murmured. It felt surreal to receive even that morsel of recognition from her. I took the mug to the table, watching the morning light spill through the window. My father ambled in, glancing at me. He said nothing, but I noticed he didn't scowl. He sat at the table, flipping through the daily paper. Something about it felt oddly peaceful, this new hush of acceptance, or maybe just a lull in the tension. I finished my coffee quickly, then went to my room to dress. I had an appointment at the events company to finalize paperwork. My mother called after me, "Don't be late," as if it was an admonishment, but it was so half-hearted that it almost made me smirk. She knew, as well as I did, that I wouldn't jeopardize this chance. I'd no longer give them any reason to label me a failure. As I headed out the door, I spotted Claudette in the living room. She gave me a little smile, then mouthed, "Good luck." My heart clenched with sudden gratitude. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. Outside, the sunshine felt like an embrace. My footsteps felt lighter than they had in years. I walked with confidence, shoulders back, chin high, telling myself that this was the start of something real and lasting. My parents might take their time recognizing that I was neither a disgrace nor a disappointment. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd already begun. Maybe tomorrow they'd even brag about my new position to someone. The thought almost made me laugh. Imagine them proudly announcing to Aunt So-and-so or Uncle Ralph, "Did you hear? She's working at a top-notch events company. She's really going places." And if that did happen, well, I'd greet their sudden pride with grace. Because deep down, I knew what it was like to feel worthless, to feel overshadowed by the negative opinions of others. And that was precisely why I would never let someone's scorn define me again. I pictured how my mother and father might react as my career took off, how they'd slowly shift from, "She's a disgrace," to, "We're so proud of her." It wouldn't be overnight. It would take time. But after years of scorn, I had my foot in the door of a genuine opportunity. I felt unstoppable. I half wanted to shout it to the world. They told me I was a disgrace to the family. Now they brag about me to everyone. But I held that triumph close, letting it energize me for the day ahead. I didn't need to shout it. Actions spoke louder than words, and I was ready to let my actions speak. My footsteps resonated on the sidewalk as I made my way to the new job. The sun, now a bright orb in a clear sky, lit my path like a promise. I felt my heart drumming with excitement and quiet pride. I thought about how I'd greet Gloria with confidence. I thought about the new responsibilities I'd shoulder, and about the day I'd finally pack my bags and leave my parents' house behind. It was coming. I could sense that once I earned steady income and maybe saved a little, I'd find my own place, a sanctuary where I didn't have to brace against criticism every time I walked through the door. This day, just a single day, had begun with tension and gloom, but it was ending with the promise of a brighter future. I had discovered my own strength, my capacity to help others, and my ability to secure a real job. My parents hadn't changed much, but they'd shown the slightest glimmer of grudging respect. It was far from perfect, but it was enough to give me hope. I remembered how I'd woken up to those muffled insults, my stomach twisted in dread. And now, the world looked entirely different. Part of me wanted to run back home just to wave that new sense of self in their faces, to prove that all their negative forecasts about me had collapsed. But I reined in that impulse. In time, they'd see for themselves. And if they never fully saw, well, I could live with that. Because I saw it. I recognized my worth, at long last, and that realization would never fade again. With my new job, my repaired bond with Claudette, and the evidence that I could stand up for myself, I felt unstoppable. It was as if all the pieces had aligned in a single day to catapult me into a brand new chapter. And that was enough. More than enough, really. I walked on, carrying the memory of my mother's half-compliment, of my father's reluctant acceptance, of Claudette's tearful gratitude, and most importantly, of my own unwavering determination to move forward. My heart felt full, my mind clear, and my spirit free. I was no longer the family disgrace, and one day very soon, they'd all be boasting that they'd known all along I had it in me. And when that happened, I would just smile, hold my head high, and keep moving forward, because this was my life, and I had finally reclaimed it.